What's going on, everybody? This is Rick Navarro. I am your host and retouching teacher for the Pixel 101 Photoshop Academy course. Today we're going to be talking about another beauty retouching image. And I figured that this time, instead of doing a time lapse, I would just kind of work through it in real time so you can kind of get a feel for not only exactly what's being done, but for the amount of time it takes to do something like this. This is an image that we'll be working on today, and it's a full screen image. You can see like a face, super tight, is going to be filling the entire frame. And you know, just like anything, as far as the scale of an image, you know, when you're looking at an image like this, you might be thinking there's, you know, a little bit more detail than the average image. Well, it's kind of all relative, right? Like if this was a full body image, you know, you'd have maybe a smaller areas of skin to retouch. But I like to look at images that are super tight, kind of in the same mindset, like there is an entire landscape of image that needs to be edited. Now, that being said, this is a fairly simple image because at first glance, her skin is actually pretty decent. We'll get into some of these blemish areas and addressing, you know, maybe some of these finer details. But for the most part, this is actually going to be a pretty quick retouch overall. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it. So first things first, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and then I'm going to run a frequency separation action on it. If you don't know what frequency separation is, please go ahead and check the video link that I'm going to put right here. And I'm also offering a free frequency separation action that is going to be provided in the show notes below. I've already got it loaded here, so I'm going to go ahead and apply this directly on, and there it is. High frequency, low frequency, that's what that stands for. And let's go ahead and get into some of these blemishes. I'm gonna pick the healing brush tool. Gonna kind of go in the direction of the skin. You can kind of see the direction that these lines kind of naturally want to take on. We're not trying to eliminate texture here, just anything that may be raised or that may be drawing attention away. Okay, so we're going to continue to work through some of the blemishes here with the spot healing on the high pass layer. And actually, before I do that, let's go ahead and add a black and white checker layer so I can actually see a little bit better. One of the reasons you might use a black and white checker layer is because of the way that our eyes work. The cones and rods in our eyes allow us to see things in black and white a little bit more clearly, as opposed to maybe something in color. So it kind of defines these edges just a little bit better and allows us to kind of work through some of these areas, and allows us to see what's happening with the skin at a better rate. So I like to use a black and white layer, especially on the blemish pass. This is what I call the blemish pass, where I'm basically just taking out all the easy stuff. I like to go with the grain or kind of in the direction of anything that I'm grabbing. This is using a content aware fill function to eliminate some of these marks. And when I do that, going to sample from the pixels around it, the textures around it. You got to be real careful with this particular method. It has a tendency to blur the images, if not used with a small brush, and if not going in the direction. Like if I go this way, you can see all of this kind of blurry texture that's starting to be created, as opposed to if I go with the direction of the line I'm trying to eliminate. It's a little bit more natural of a transition. I'm actually going to go ahead and put that back. Okay. Like I said, like this one doesn't have a ton of issues that I want to get into and remove and manipulate around. This one's fairly decent, and remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You don't want to eliminate stuff just because you've got Photoshop power like that. You know, it really just depends on what the image calls for and what's distracting. Another technique, I'm zoomed in here pretty close, and you want to be mindful of that, because while you're in here zoomed in at 1000%, you know, you're looking at the details, the micro details, very tight. But you want to be able to kind of pull back to a macro, really. And let's take a look at that from here. This is where we started, this is where we are, and be cognizant of the fact that, you know, you may be missing details more like in the tonal range as opposed to like the textural that are really relevant to the image and relevant to making the image quality. And you don't want to be addressing things that you don't need to just because you can. A lot of bad Photoshop is really the product of the fact that you can edit that out. You can do this, you can do that, and it's just not needed. Now that's where it kind of gets over into the preferential range and the subjectivity of art overall. And you know, there's a balance. There's kind of the quote unquote, you know, standard, which again, even in a professional capacity is very subjective. But you know, I feel like most people can spot bad Photoshop a mile away, right? So you just want to make sure you're not falling within that camp. And then the rest of it, the nuance of it really gets down to the subjectivity. And that's the part that just even in my own career, understanding the psychology and the philosophy of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, you know, you have to allow your certain amount of latitude, you know, but don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who's, you know, that guy or gal who's out here manipulating images entirely too far just because you've got the power under your fingertips. You know, it's silly, and it gives the industry a bad name. Natural retouching is really kind of the desired goal. We've all seen these memes or these articles that show Photoshop in a really bad light. So, and especially in beauty, you know, the goal here is to have it as natural as possible. Imagine this. Imagine you're doing work for a company like Target. And if you've ever been inside of a Target store, you know that those beauty images, you know, are going to be blown up to the size of an aisle, an end cap in an aisle, you know, an advertising piece that's going to be hung very high. Now, what's interesting is that Target in particular has actually opted more recently with a very natural retouch, almost unretouched. And it's funny because, you know, to the average consumer, to the average person walking through a Target store, you can tell that the images haven't been polished up to like what, you know, the current beauty standard was maybe even a year ago. But as a professional, I can tell that their natural, quote unquote, natural look is indeed unnatural and still being retouched to a certain degree. But they are purposely leaving in blemishes, they're purposely leaving in, you know, certain things that, you know, were quote unquote standard not even that long ago. So it's subjective, and I would argue anyone, I would very strongly argue or disagree with anyone who says otherwise, because it's just not true. And I've worked in enough advertising agencies and enough retouching houses to know that those quote unquote standards that people like to argue about change from shop to shop, brand to brand, house to house. Like, these ideas of what beauty is and what standard retouching is, it's a fool's argument, you know? I have had so many conversations with clients that, like, this is our standard. This is what we do. This is what we want. Everyone uses the same terminology, you know, natural, light, you know, these are all colloquialisms that people will use in order to describe something, but they're not the same. They're not the same, they're not identical. They're ideas. That philosophical standpoint is a very important distinction that you need to understand. And give yourself a certain measure of grace when it comes to these things, and just kind of ebb and flow with it, you know? What does this client need? Oh, okay, sure, I can do that, you know? Am I interjecting my own personal styles into certain things? Yeah, to a degree. Hold it with an open hand, though, you know? If somebody's hiring you to do something, you're at their mercy. So just do what they want, you know? It doesn't matter whether you think it looks good or not. What matters is if they think it's good, and then, you know, does that check cash? At the end of the day, you're a tool for a job. So don't get caught up in the artistic arguments and the particulars of things that don't matter. They're not going to pay your bills. And at the end of the day, if you don't want to use it in your portfolio, you don't have to. I'm getting a little caught up here. I want to see what's actually happening in the skin texture. So if you take notice of this right here, see, like, all this texture that's happening right here, and some of this blotchiness. I don't like that, so I need to figure out if I need to continue to keep working that or if I'm actually seeing it. And I am. So I'm going to turn this off for a second so that I can get in here to some of this texture. Oh, make sure I'm on the right layer. And maybe I need to back up a little bit. Let's go back in here with this history brush and brush back in very lightly. Notice that I've got it set to 50% opacity. I think I went too far and I started making moves that were too broad. So I've painted that back on very lightly, and then I'm going to kind of move in here very slowly. Remember, that black and white layer is exaggerating things just for the purpose of me being able to see them. So in this particular case, I went too far and I need to be able to go backwards. So I've got my history brush that allows me to do that, and I'm grateful for that, because now I've got a way to come back to some of these finer details, like these little baby hairs that aren't super noticeable. But like I said, like if you're retouching for a billboard that's going to be printed, not a billboard like that you would see on the side of the street, but a billboard that's high definition, or, you know, like a 16-bit sort of print. You know, this is definitely stuff you could see if you were walking around the makeup and cosmetic aisle of Target, or, you know, Sears or JCPenney's, or any of those stores. Any high-end store that has very large print media in their locations. That's how I kind of like to gauge the texture and if it's appropriate. Turn that texture layer off for a second and get in here to these tones, see if they're affecting my texture at all. Looks like they might be just a little bit. Now you might think because the image is super tight, right? And it's, you know, it looks like there's not a lot of surface area. Remember in the beginning I said I kind of treat everything as like a full body image, or a full image I should say, whereas there are a lot of things to address. In fact, in some cases where you're dealing with a close-up image, but this image has so much texture because it is so close, there's almost more to make sure you need to deal with. There's more that you need to pay attention to because you're so tight and all of those details are starting to come through. So be aware and be cautious on how you move to address some of these issues. Don't be flippant in your retouch, thinking that, oh, it's a tighter shot, you know, there'll be less because there's less detail. No, there's actually more detail. Okay, this is about where I'm going to zoom out and make sure I'm not over exaggerating. It's a little dark spot right there. Let's see if that's happening here. It's not, it's happening in the texture. Same thing right here. Okay, I'm getting to a place where I am liking where it's at. I'm looking for uneven areas, blotches, patches, dark areas, uneven skin overall, while I'm maintaining the skin texture. I did a little bit of vein passing in the first round. Let's go ahead and do a little bit more here. Just using content aware fill to get rid of that. And right there. I don't want it to be pure white. That would be silly, and it would look really, really false. I might lighten those later, but I'm not going to lighten it like in a local. I'm just going to brighten the eye, and that's by nature going to kind of lighten the white of the eye. And that's all I'm really looking for. So now I've come out of that black and white layer because I want to see in real time, in real space, what's happening. Remember that black and white checker layer, or if you use like a polarizing checker layer, where you're using a curve layer and manipulating that curve so that it looks like a W or you know, squiggly line that goes up and down. Those are extremes, right? And they're meant to allow you to see things that you can't with the naked eye. And they're also going to see things that you're not going to see on your screen because all of your screen profiles might be different. So remember, your end user may be viewing this on a phone and maybe you viewing it on a desktop. And you want to keep that in mind because you never know what it's going to be viewed on, and that screens vary from from user to user and location to location. That ICC profile that is addressing the color interpretation is different from person to person. So what you want, hopefully you're working on a calibrated machine, but even that to a certain degree is only going to be calibrated to maybe your printer or maybe to your viewing. So to neutralize it as much as possible, you just kind of have to know that you're going to assume that your setup is as tight and as clean as possible, but that there's going to be a certain degree of variance that is tolerable, knowing that as this image is viewed from person to person, that there is going to be a fair amount of discrepancy in color. Now, if you're printing in a professional capacity, obviously there's kind of going to be ways for you to color test and make sure that you're getting the best possible color output. But that always makes me laugh too, because again, you don't know what your end user is going to be using. So there's only so many variables that you can control. what I find is that it's not so much about the right or an exact color. It's more about who's got the power to sign off. Who is in charge of saying yay or nay, that's good enough, print. You know, the nature of art is subjective. This has been my biggest career lesson. I've been working in the photographic and retouching space for almost 20 years now. And this is the one thing that I have found is the most consistent from place to place. And that is the idea the ideas are different, or excuse me, the ideas of perfection are different from place to place. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not being entirely honest. Or they within themselves are being subjective. Because for every one opinion, there's another one that will contradict it or counterbalance it or have a different perspective. Some people swear by frequency separation. I met a very good retoucher who swears against it. And this guy had an incredible beauty portfolio in a professional capacity, working in the Los Angeles entertainment and advertising space. And he was very good. And we had a great conversation one day. And I was like, well, what do you think about this? And he's like, I don't like anything that adds weight to my files. And I got it. I know what he meant. You know, and if he could get a similar result by working a different workflow that worked for him, then why not? Like, there's no right or wrong way here. It's just all subjectivity. You know, there's some people that are hardcore dodge and burners. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, if it's not your thing, don't use it. Don't use it. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I like that the skin texture has been maintained. A couple little areas right here. It's got a little soft. I'm gonna deal with that real quick. I'm gonna pull from areas that are very close by where the skin is very similar, if not identical. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm using the patch tool to kind of sample textures from areas that are very close by. And that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for just even skin tones. Look at this big line here in our tonal layer. I had addressed that in the texture, but you're finding it here in the tonal. So don't be afraid to go back and forth. This blurred layer is your tonal range. So these areas that have pieces of the previously removed blemish, if for some reason you're having difficulty, just take a glance at it, because it might also be in there. Like, I might not have blurred that far enough. I like to blur this to a degree of which, like, all the detail, the fine detail is gone. But like, if I zoom out to like 100% here, or actually further out, you know, like, I can't see hair and I can't see pores, but all the color is maintained. So once I go back in here, you know, and those things are brought together, then I'm good. See this blurring that's happening right here? Dark spots. Okay. Not mad at that. Make sure you're not creating problems, and if you are, that you're fixing them. Okay, overall, not too shabby. That's my skin pass. I'm gonna go ahead and add a curved layer here for the dodge and burn. Let's put that above. I like to pull it down to kind of see how far I want to go. Probably right about there. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill that with black and grab a brush. There we go. And with a very soft brush, I'm going to paint in some of these natural areas that are already dark. Remember, the eye is a shape, it's a sphere, and since that is the case, it goes back, dark recedes, white proceeds, it comes forward. So much like a makeup artist, I'm going to come in here and contour. Check this out. Look how the makeup came. Oop, let's move that back. Look how the makeup came all the way to the edge here, but over here it does not. So we kind of have a decision to make if we're going to paint in more makeup right there. But let's just go ahead and finish this dodge and burn layer. Now, if you have experience with makeup, this kind of helps you because you're basically doing the same thing a makeup artist might do. That might have been a little bit too much right here. You're doing the same thing a makeup artist might do by contouring and placing highlights that may or may not be there. I have it set at a very low opacity because I'm going to build this color up. I don't want to get too heavy into it right out the gate. I'm also using a Wacom screen. I have the Intuit's Wacom HD22, so I'm actually working directly on the screen with a stylus. It's a screen that's a tablet, which is a luxury, I know, but it definitely helps, and it's helped me address some of these issues too. Now I just noticed something. If you pull back here, take a look at this eye and this eye. This eye is much bigger, which is funny because that's the eye that's farther away. So that's something I'm going to address probably at a last stage. I'll probably shrink that eye down just a pinch so that it doesn't look like one is bigger than the other or that is more opened. I'm going to do an additional retouch layer right here to see if I can't sample in some of this. I'm going to make sure I'm on current and below. I'm in a different layer. Let's put that right here. And I'm going to very carefully kind of fill in some of this missing eyeliner, or eyeshadow I should say. Now this is a little tricky because those eyelashes are in there and we don't really want to cover that up. So you know what I might do instead? I might just go ahead and make a selection around this area that I think this eyeshadow would be, and I'm going to use a curve layer and just darken it, because what's happening here is you have this kind of sparkly glittery texture that has been placed on the middle of the eyelid, which is the most prominent point of the eye, and then it's been faded into a darker eyeshadow here. So I can't sample from here. Can't sample from the middle and pull that, to the back. So it's more than likely going to be something like this. I'm going to pull that black point down. maybe give a little bit more contrast. And I might even clip to that a hue sat layer to pull out some of that red. There you go, in the red channel. I'm gonna pull it out a little bit. I'm gonna grab this mask and soften it so it looks more like it's applied. And then I can, from here, see how much further I need to go. Okay, so with that being done, let's blur that edge just a pinch more, or actually incorporate it even better to this eyelash that's happening over here. And you know what, I'm gonna add a little bit of that dark over here as well. See, at this point, I think I might be able to add just a pinch more sparkly to the middle. Soften that brush up. Using the warp tool to kind of shape this just a little bit. Again, that might be something I fix with a liquefy function after the fact too. I'm gonna pull a little bit, and check out this edge. See how it's getting a little burnt, a little red. That's why I like to go into this red channel. May not be the one. Let's see what this looks like. No, it is. Looks like there's reds already in the eye there. Okay, cool. So again, here's a little quick before and after, before and after. Let's get back over here to our dodge layer. Dodge is looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and add a highlight layer, or a, excuse me, that was a burn layer, not a dodge. This is going to be the dodge. And she's pretty bright right now, so I'm not gonna get crazy. Just gonna pull that up a little bit. Same thing, fill that with black. Come in here, and now we'll start to paint in some of those highlights that I was telling you about. Here's the brightening of the eye, and I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm just going over the areas that have highlights already in them. You can kind of see it in the skin here. Here's a little pro tip. This corner of the eye here brightens the entire eye. This portion of the eye, I had a teacher, he used to tell me it's like a sausage. It's like a little eye meat. It's actually the skull bone that's coming down through here that's giving it a little bit of a highlight, so I always like to hit that a little bit. And again, I have my brushes set pretty low, so I'm building this up. And notice these little spots here, the ridge of the lip line, corners of the mouth, the fatty part of the lip, tip of the nose. Don't forget your brush. These little areas that light are hitting on. Let's pull back a little bit to see where we're at. On, off, on, off. A little bit in here. I think the eyebrows are two different colors right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a selection. This one is a little bit more red than I think I care for. I kind of like the darker brown color. So I'm gonna make a selection there, grab a hue sat layer, isolate it down to the red channel, and let's desaturate that a little bit. There we go. It's grabbing all of the reds in there that are, especially the punchy reds, pulling that out a little bit. In fact, I might open that up a little bit more and get some of these other areas that are bleeding out to the edges. So if you look at the mask, and then I'm also going to feather that edge just a pinch, even though I don't really need to because it's only grabbing the reds. Just an easier, smoother transition. Okay, let's look at these teeth real quick. Same thing. Let's make a selection in here. It doesn't have to be super tight because I'm only going to isolate, or I'm going to isolate by color, so the edges aren't going to show. And if they are, if there's a little bit of bounce light that's happening, I can easily feather that edge. So it is. So this is a good example of where there's bounce light, and I don't want that to affect the lips. So one of the things I can do is, obviously I can tighten up that mask, but this is a quick way to kind of soften up that selection a little bit more. And if you see, I've softened the edges, and now it's leaving the lips, but still affecting the teeth. And typically, you know, I don't actually recommend desaturating. I actually go bright. So I'm gonna pull that back up. I'm gonna go back up to this way, because there is color in the teeth. There is color in the teeth. So don't neglect that. Don't fight it. Don't desaturate it, because it might look a little crazy. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this mask down just a pinch. So I'm gonna go against my own mantra, and I'm gonna tighten this mask down just a pinch. I still left the feathering on the mask because I just don't want that desaturation to bleed out into these lips. I want to keep these lips pretty detailed. Okay, cool. I'm liking where this is going. I think I'm gonna do a couple little stylistic things right now. Like, I'm gonna add a little punch to these eyes, especially since this is kind of a what do they call that? A shadow. Drawing a blank because I'm trying to teach and retouch at the same time. Smoky eye. Here we go. This is like a smoky eye look. So I'm gonna add a little punch, a little contrast. Same thing. Grab that mask. Blur it really soft. Clean it up if you need to. You get any burning or this color where it's a little bit too intense, you know, you can kind of pull back on that opacity. This is all preferential at this point. I might even want a little bit of that contrast to be applied to the pupil itself, to the iris here. See how some of those gold and those yellowy colors come through. Or what you could do is you could do it on a separate layer, and let's see how far back we go. Brush tool right about here. You can do it on a separate layer, and you have a little bit more control, so it's not being included with that smoky eye edit. I think that might be a better idea too. So now we get those little cool colors that are coming through. You know what, I might not even pull them down that far. She's got, look, blue and green, and then this one's more hazel with a little bit of blue in it. And I'll soften that edge. Cool. Looking good. Okay, right about here, I like to do a stamp, and I'm gonna apply an unmasked sharpen to this entire face. And as you can see, it adds like a bit of sparkle, adds a bit of like crunch to the pixel. Now, I don't like to apply that maybe overall, so I'm gonna add a mask to that, and then selectively, again with a light brush, I'm going to bring in some of these areas, like focal points. I like the highlight texture on the eyes, these little finer details, things that make it draw your attention, like lips. Chromes look usually pretty nice. This fine detail, all these little feathery details in this brush should be pretty cool. And because I'm using low opacity, it's only applying it very softly, so I can build up the application and control it a little bit better. Still feel like these teeth are a little too yellow. Let me go back into that red channel, and I am gonna pull them out. Just a pinch more. You gotta be careful right here because you don't want them to go gray. So that is what you need to look for there. And if it gets a little hazy because the midtones are flattening out, maybe add a curved layer and clip it down, and maybe just, or even a brightness and contrast might help here. What I think is happening is because it's in the reds, it's not grabbing as much of the yellows. So I'm going to grab this slider and pull it over a little bit. See, right now it looks a little flat, looks a little gray, which is not what I want. So let's see if we can't pull it out of the red channel. Also getting a little color cast right here. If you'll notice, that's almost in the magenta. So while I'm in here, let's go ahead and grab magentas. I think what I'm going to do is add a separate one just for that one. Clip of levels there too, because look how dark that tooth got. Maybe adjust it more in the midtones. Remember, pull back so you can kind of see the overall. See how it's blending. All right. Right about there is when I would send it into review, and this is a place where you're gonna, have anyone, like I said, who's got the power. This is a place where I'd say, if you're sending this in for an approval, this is where you want it to be seen, and from here you can kind of nitpick it to death, and that's fine. Like, that's part of the nature of what we do, but this is kind of the process of retouching at a high level. There will be a lot of back and forth. If you're retouching it for yourself, you are the art director, you are the creative director, you're gonna make that call. But if you're retouching for a company or a brand, like, this is where you want to send it into the powers that be and let them kind of review and say, hey, we're gonna refine it from here, you've gone too far here, you need to go further there, so on and so forth. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out some of the other retouching videos I have in the library. We've got several on compositing, several on high-end beauty retouch, as well as if you are a Photoshop newbie and you're just learning the reins, like, check out the Photoshop 101 course to get yourself up to speed. With that being said, don't forget to like, subscribe, smash that bell button. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.